Hello, guys. This is Elsie Holt, and this is my update for the week of May the 6th. As you know, last week we started our two-part discussion about Ted Bundy, and today we're going to continue. And real quick, before we jump into this, I'm going to introduce you from the guys from last week. You probably remember them. Ryan Rayonec, how you doing, man?
No, I'm hanging in there. Very,
And
very, go ahead, because, yeah, go ahead.
okay, so we have Ryan's hanging in there, and Zach, how are you today, man?
Good, man. Super excited.
Excellent. Well, we're going to jump right into this. Early morning hours of August 16th, 1975, in the suburb of Salt Lake City called Granger. There's a police officer named Bob Woodward. Woodward. I'm thinking of All the President's Men. Bob Hayward. And he's patrolling through a suburban residential neighborhood. He sees a beige VW Beetle driving at slow speeds, just kind of cruising oddly through this neighborhood. And he thinks, this is kind of weird. What's this guy prowling around for? So he flips his lights. Well, the car, the VW Beetle, suddenly takes off. It runs two stop signs before eventually stopping. Policeman gets out. The driver of the vehicle gets out, the driver of the Beetle. And the cop's like, well, why were you in such a hurry, man? What were you running for? The guy's like, oh, I was just kind of spooked. I didn't see your lights at first, and I didn't know who was following me, and so I just started to drive. I apologize. Cop's like, well, do you mind if I look in your vehicle? And this fellow goes, sure. So Officer Hayward leans into the vehicle, immediately notices something strange. The passenger seat of the Beetle has been removed and is sitting in the back of the Volkswagen. But that's not the only odd thing that he finds in the vehicle. He also finds a bag. And in this bag, he discovers a ski mask, rope, trash bags, a flashlight, an ice pick. So, having some very serious suspicions about this gentleman, he decides to cuff the guy, run him down to the station. We'll come to find out the driver of the Beetle is Theodore Bundy. They have nothing really on him. He tried to run from the cops, but that aside, they couldn't tie him to any specific burglary, which is what they actually thought the kit was for. They did not immediately assume that this guy was trying to kill people. They thought he was trying to break into houses because he was prowling around the neighborhood. They release him, but there's a detective in the Salt Lake City Police Department who hears the story of this strange guy in the VW Beetle, and bells and whistles start to go off in his head. And he remembers the case of Carol DeRoche, a young woman who we talked about last week, who was window shopping in a mall when a man walked up posing as a policeman, lured her into his VW Beetle, drove her to a parking lot, and then tried to attack her with a crowbar. She got out of the car, flagged down some help, got in, and told the people that she flagged down that guy was trying to kill me, but the guy had escaped. So this detective goes over to Carol DeRoche with a photograph of Ted Bundy and shows it to her and says, do you know this guy? And Carol DeRoche goes, that's the guy that tried to kidnap me. And the detective's like, oh, okay. So he's starting to piece this thing together. And he also remembers a tip, one of many hundreds of tips that came in from Washington State. And it was reported by a lady named Elizabeth Klepfer. And if you remember last week, Elizabeth was the single mother who Ted Bundy fell in love with. They started to live together. She had a child from a previous marriage, and Ted was like kind of a father figure to the kid. He was now living at this point, as I said, in Salt Lake City, Utah. And Elizabeth was still up in the Seattle area. So the detective boogies on up to Seattle and wants to talk to Elizabeth about Ted Bundy. And she starts to tell him things like, I always thought there were weird things about Ted. Like sometimes he would come in with stereos and TVs, and I didn't know where they were coming from. But then she said something that really interested him, because she said one time she found a bag full of women's clothing. And she was like, this clothing is not mine. Ted never gave it to me. any of this clothing. He just kind of had it. And then as soon as she pointed it out, it mysteriously disappeared. So bells and whistles still going off, okay? So what happened from there is that in September of that year, Ted Bundy sold his VW Beetle to a Midvale teenager there in the Salt Lake City area. And that allowed the cops finally to get a closer look at this VW Beetle because it was no longer in Ted's possession. And so they went into the Beetle as quickly as they could and went through it with a fine-tooth comb, and they came out with hair samples matching Carol DeRanche, Melissa Smith, a girl who had gone missing, if you remember last week, the police chief's daughter who went missing, and another young lady. They also managed, based on this evidence, to get a search warrant of Bundy's apartment. So they went into Bundy's apartment. They found even more interesting things. They found a Colorado ski resort guide that had a check mark beside the Wildwood Inn. Again, last week, Karen Campbell was a young woman staying at the Wildwood Inn, got in an elevator, went upstairs, and was never seen again. Along with that, they found a brochure for the high school where Deborah Kent had gone missing. Deborah Kent attended a school play, went out in the parking lot, and was never seen again. So suddenly, everything's starting to fall into place for the Salt Lake City detectives. What they do now is they bring in Carol DeRanche, who was the attempted kidnapping victim, and they want her to look at Ted Bundy in a lineup. Well, Ted Bundy had a beard, and he had kind of longer, shaggy brown hair. He shows up for this lineup. He shaved his beard, cut his hair short, and has parted it on the other side. And he's also standing differently and speaking differently. So the cops have to scramble because they had the lineup set up with people that had like a hippie beard. And now they have to find like a bunch of guys that look like he looks now. So they go through, and this is the 70s, 1975. So there's not a lot of people with short hair and, clean shaven faces, but they got plenty of cops around. So they just start grabbing detectives out of the bullpen that are white guys that mildly resemble Bundy. And they line them all up with Bundy in there. Carol DeRanche comes in instantly. Boom. That's the guy. Hears his voice, recognizes the voice, points out Ted Bundy. And that is how they managed to charge him with the attempted kidnapping and aggravated assault of Carol DeRanche. Now, what happened then is on February 23rd, 1976, Bundy stood trial. This was a bench trial. You could have a jury trial, but Bundy's attorneys decided, since there was so much publicity surrounding the case up in Washington State and the case in Utah, and now it was being connected to Colorado, they thought that the best thing for him to do was have a bench trial. And a bench trial is basically where a judge acts as both judge and jury. So there is no jury present. 4 days, this Carol DeRanche trial goes on. And at the end of that 4 days, the judge says, "You, sir, are guilty of kidnapping and aggravated assault." And Bundy is taken off to jail. But that's not where it ends for Bundy. Because remember, they found that ski resort from Colorado, the brochure about Karen Campbell. The Colorado guys have managed to piece together enough evidence to extradite Bundy to Colorado to stand trial for her murder. So that is what happens. Bundy is moved from Salt Lake City to Colorado, actually to Aspen, Colorado, which is where the trial takes place. And on June 7th, 1977, this trial for the murder of Karen Campbell gets underway there in Aspen. And it's kind of an interesting trial because Bundy, having been a law student, even though he was not technically a lawyer, managed to talk the judge into allowing him to be a co-counselor in his own case. And what that meant was that he had access to the law library. He didn't have to be in shackles all the time. he was basically given some of the rights of a lawyer, even though he was also the defendant. Well, this trial doesn't seem to be going very well. Bundy starts to get the impression this is not going in his favor. And Bundy doesn't like to lose because he's a very cocky and arrogant individual. So one day, there's a recess in the trial. Bundy says, I would like to do a little bit of reading during this short recess. And they allow him to go over to the law library, which is right across the hall from the courtroom. They have a guard at the door. Well, Bundy is sitting there at the law library. And it's very interesting because in the documentary, the Ted Bundy tapes, you can hear him actually talk about this. And he said that he looked over at the window and it was open and the breeze was blowing and it was a clear blue sky. And he thought, I think I'm going to leave. So while the guard was turned the other way, he goes over to the window, opens it up, looks down 2 stories at the courtyard, and decides to jump, and that's what he does. He hits the ground and he rolls, springs his right ankle, gets up, takes off into the mountains of Aspen, Colorado, before anybody is able to pursue him. Now, he is loose for 6 days. They try to shut Aspen down. Aspen has 2 roads. There are 2 roads coming into Aspen, going out of Aspen. They shut down these roads. They check every car. They never find Bundy, but apparently they found like hundreds of pounds of marijuana from these poor people who were just trying to get a little due, and they got caught in these dragnets. But they never found Bundy, at least not at first. Now, this was a premeditated escape, no matter what Ted Bundy said, because he actually came to the courtroom that day wearing 2 sets of clothes. When he leapt out the window and got a few feet from the courthouse, he quickly stripped off 1 set of clothes and had another one underneath. So he knew what he was doing that day. So that also helped him escape up into the mountains. Now, for the first 2 days, he got lost. He actually missed a couple of trails that would have led him off into another town, but he's not familiar with Colorado. He's really, he was in Utah, he lived in Utah, he lived in Washington State. He murdered people in Colorado, but he didn't have enough time there to know the mountains and the terrain and everything. He manages to find a cabin, and he breaks into this cabin, and he spends a night there. It's unoccupied. He gets some food, he sleeps, and then he also steals a rifle and poses as a hunter and goes off. Many times he manages to avoid the massive manhunt that's underway, people searching the woods and the mountains. He's always manages to get by it. Problem is, 3 days he gets lost yet again in the forest. And, again, he tells this story in the Ted Bundy tapes documentary. He says, I was completely disoriented. It started to sleet. It was frozen rain coming down on me. I'd run out of food. I couldn't, my ankle was killing me. He's in constant pain. And basically these 3 days wear him down. So what he does is he finally manages to make his way into town, and at a golf course, he finds a car with the keys in the ignition. He hops in there real quick and he starts to take off. But he's so out of it, he's weaving all over the road. So a cop sees him and pulls him over. And the cop says, hang on a second. He's wearing some glasses that he found. And also he lost like 20 pounds hiking through these mountains. So he's looking a lot more gaunt. But the cop looks at him and he realizes beyond the glasses and the gaunt appearance that that's Ted Bundy. That's the guy they've been searching for the past 6 days. And he is arrested. And he goes back to the trial. And he seems, he's actually quite proud that he managed to pull this off. And he talks about it with great pride in the taped interviews that he did later. Now, friends of his and legal advisors, they tell him, dude, you might just want to quit while the quitting is good. Because the evidence in the Karen Campbell case is kind of shaky. And there is a chance that you could get off on Karen Campbell's murder, serve 1.5 years for the DeRanch kidnapping, and be free. But Bundy doesn't quit while he's ahead. And to tell you more about that, I'm going to throw it over to Zach. But before we get into what happened once he went to prison for the Carol DeRanch kidnapping, what are you thinking about that part of the story, Ryan?
I don't like the part where he was proud about, like, you know, the whole little endeavor, because I mean, you made it a couple of days and you started like getting all weak. Like John Rambo would be very upset, you know, like and you know, like, oh, my ankle hurts. Like it's, well, if you go back now, like, you're stupid fucked, you know,
Yeah.
like you're already in big trouble, but like now you just made it worse. And now, like, you haven't had a snack for a few hours, so you're just gonna like quit. And he doesn't know the terrain. Who gives a shit? Just go far, dumbass. Like,
Yeah,
and then I
that was
don't
the
know.
thing.
He lost me right there. Like,
That was the
story got,
thing, that in 6 days, he basically just ran in circles. He never got out of the Aspen Mountains. He got so lost
dumb.
that he
Just
couldn't.
fucking dumb.
Yeah. Yeah. He wasn't very prepared. Beyond wearing 2 sets of clothes, I don't think he knew what he was getting into. But while he was in prison, Zach, you want to tell what happened while he was serving prison time there in Colorado?
Yeah. Well, he had a lot of time on his hands, obviously, being in prison, and he noticed a light, I think it was, up on top. Now, Bundy's, already made, a few attempts at escaping, one so far successful, so far, I guess, kind of. And so he's looking at this thing and he keeps observing it. He ends up stealing. It was like a piece of metal. It was pretty sharp, like a knife, but he used that to kind of cut the glue and the gum and all that stuff around the vent, the light, whatever it was up there. And he managed to, pull this out while a lot of the prisoners were showering and stuff. The guards were distracted, and he crawled up through this tiny hole, and it was amazing. And this happened in December 30th, 1977.
So this is
So,
just like a month after the first escape.
yeah. He wasn't gonna,
No one thought, like, to maybe keep an eye out. Like, he just tried to run like a second ago and we had to do manhunt. No one, like, just short-term memory, or how's that work?
Yeah, no shit. He definitely he didn't waste, a lot of time before he tried escaping again. And he got up into the vent, or up into the duct there, and he's crawling through, and he manages to get into one of the main officers' apartments that is attached to the prison. And this guy's not home. This guy's out with his wife at dinner, and Bundy manages to crawl through the vent and crawl into his apartment, where he changes clothes. I think he grabbed a few things, and he just walked out the front door. And no one saw. He just, confident motherfucker. He just walked out the front door.
Yeah, and this lasted, this particular walking out the front door, it was not getting lost in the woods either. He kept going.
Well, and
hopefully he brought a snack.
Like, I can imagine, I mean, as he's thinking, like, wow, this is way easier than jumping out of a 2-story window. Like, that would have been just like, so no one saw him. He manages to again, steal a car. He hauls his ass to Florida. So he goes clear across the United States. And that's when he manages to go to FSU, Florida State University.
Nice.
And there's a sorority there, Chi Omega sorority. And Bundy, he's watching these girls for a while and stuff. And, and by now we know Bundy, he can't control himself. So one night, and this was approximately at 2:45 a.m. in the morning.
Why can't he control himself? All the killing.
Because he has, he has a
I'm fucking with you.
problem, dude. He has a fucking problem. We've established this part.
I'm fucking with you, bro.
But and what I'm about to get into is very, very gruesome about what he does to these girls. Is pretty horrific. He grabs a piece of oak firewood that he finds outside, and he breaks in through one of the back windows. And he goes up and he goes into one of the rooms. One of the girls is 21-year-old Margaret Bowman, and he beats her and then strangles her. The officials could not tell if she was beaten to death or if she was, the strangulation. They didn't know what killed her because it was both so horrific. Then he went over right next door and killed 20-year-old Lisa Levy.
The fuck?
He did the same thing. He beat her and strangled her. Then he went over right down the hall and killed 2 more girls, Kathy Kleiner and Karen Chandler. Now, let me say this. They say that 4 attacks took place within a 15-minute period. And which is just that's just freaking crazy. And at this point, Bundy's a mad dog. So he's gone. I don't think he's fucking thinking about getting caught. I think he's just in kill mode permanently. And so then he goes down the street, still on the campus, and he goes to the basement of Sherry Thomas. Now, this woman, he does some horrific things to her. I mean, he cuts off one of her nipples. He
didn't. He bit off her nipple.
Yes. Let me rephrase that. He bit off her nipple, and he also bit her one of her butt cheeks. And I'm only saying this because later on you'll know why I'm saying this. So anyway, he fractures her jaw and everything, and she ends up surviving. She permanently she's deaf in one ear. She's like cracked. She's messed up the rest of her life. Now he goes down. This is probably maybe a county over, and he sees I believe it was a 9-year-old girl. And he tries to, talk to her and stuff. Well, the girl's brother walks up, kind of, scares Bundy off a little bit. He's asking questions and stuff, and calling Bundy out. So Bundy doesn't want to be challenged, so he leaves, goes about half a county over, and abducts a 12-year-old girl named Kimberly Diane Leach. Now, I think it was February 8th, 1978. They found Kimberly Diane Leach in a pig pen out in the woods. She was murdered, and it was pretty horrific. Well, Bundy stole a beetle. He's quite fond of these beetles. He steals a beetle, and it's funny. He's actually going towards Alabama.
Right, which is my home state. For those of you who don't know.
Yeah, he's going right towards Alabama, and he gets right to the state line, and he gets pulled over. He gets pulled over by he's got a real bad habit of stealing cars and getting pulled over like not long after he steals them. He gets pulled over by Pensacola police officer David Lee. So Officer Lee, pulls him over, recognizes him, and there's a scuffle. They're fighting and stuff. Bundy's trying to run. Well, Officer Lee shot a warning shot at him, and he tries to take the officer's gun from him. I'm sorry, Bundy tries taking the officer's gun. It becomes a whole thing. Well, he ends up arresting Bundy. And while under arrest, Bundy says, "I really wish you would have killed me."
Well, and two, Mr. Bundy, they didn't know who this guy was because he had no ID on him and like 21 stolen credit cards, which is how he had been living in Florida. And when they arrested him, he actually said that his name was Meisner. So there was a long period of time where they didn't know who this guy was. I mean, this was, you have to remember, this is, late 70s, pre-internet. What was going on all the way across the country, they didn't initially tie to Florida. They thought this was just some guy who ran from the cops and had stolen a car named Meisner. Well, they start to publicize this mystery man, and they're like, does anybody know who this guy is? And the real Meisner calls up the cops and says, "Oh, by the way, guys, you don't have me in custody." And then that's when they know, okay, this guy has stolen an identity, and there may be more to him than meets the eye. In fact, this Chi Omega thing, what if he had something to do with that? So they start piecing this stuff together. And what happens is Bundy, after several days of refusing, he actually gets arraigned for the stolen car and assaulting the police officer and trying to evade arrest. And at the arraignment, the judge says, "At this point, I don't know what to do because this young man will not tell us who he is. We know that he's not Meisner, but he won't tell us." And he goes to the cops eventually and he says, "Okay, listen, you want to know who I am? You're going to give me one phone call. You give me this phone call and I will tell you who I am." And the person he chooses to call is Elizabeth Kepfler, his girlfriend in Washington State. And he tells her, "Look, I'm in deep shit. And when this comes out and you find out all the details of this, it's going to be big and it's going to be bad." And so for that phone call, this Meisner fellow admits to the police that I'm really a Theodore Robert Bundy, and I'm a fugitive on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. And that's where the next part of this story begins. Thoughts, Ryan, on the horror in Florida?
I mean, why? Like it's almost like Catch Me If You Can. Only he seems to not care about money. Yeah.
No. Yeah, I don't think he does. Other than having money to get by and live.
Like normally, someone who's like all like into all this, secrecy and everything else is usually after some sort of money. He just likes to kill girls like a lot. Like fuck's sake, man. Yeah. There's not really much positive to it.
Yeah, and the Tallahassee sheriff has no sense of humor with Ted Bundy, and he knows that when he finds out the details of Ted's previous crimes that he's accused.
Why though would he? Why would he? He said for the phone call, whatever. But he could say, "Okay, give me the phone call." He can get the phone call he wants, and then you still don't have to tell him who you are. You could, you could have been bluffing, like, "Yeah, I'm whoever." Like, why would he? It seems like he should have waited longer. He should have just rode that "they don't know who I am" thing out as long as he could. There's no internet. It's a completely different world.
Let me add this. We've talked a little about this, but like Bundy is super arrogant. I mean, he loves publicity for anything, and this guy can't do anything without saying his own name in it. And honestly, I think that's why he gave his real name. He just couldn't resist.
And I think that question, Ryan, as well as what Zach is saying, which is absolutely true, will be answered here shortly when I go into one of the major character flaws that wound up being Ted Bundy's, one of Ted Bundy's, it put the nail on his coffin, I'll put it that way. Because what happened down in Tallahassee, Florida, is the sheriff was a no-nonsense kind of dude. And he really didn't care for this Chi Omega slang. And he really, really didn't care for the murder of this little girl and her being dumped in that pig pen. So he made it his mission to take Theodore Bundy down. And what he did was he put him in a cell with 3 locks on the door, 2 of which were padlocks. And he had him guarded constantly. So Bundy was in a little bitty cell, and he was not going to get out of it. No way. Another thing that he did is one night, him and a bunch of cops came to Bundy's cell, and they said, "Ted, pop up." And it's the middle of the night, and Bundy's like, "What?" And he's thinking, these guys are going to take me somewhere. And they do take him somewhere. And they transfer him several times through several different cars. And Bundy, in his confession tape, said, he really thought they were going to fuck him up and leave him in a ditch somewhere, not unlike what Bundy had done to many people, which they didn't do, sadly. What they did was they took him to a dentist's office. And remember those bite marks? He liked to bite people on the butt, and he liked to bite off nipples. Well, they had his bite impressions. And he walks into this dentist's office, and he sees 3 dentists standing there in the chair waiting for him. And he turns to the sheriff, and he says, you can't do this. And my lawyer. No, you're not doing this. And the sheriff said, I actually have a warrant here to do this. So I have the legal right to take your teeth impressions. And at that point, the sheriff said that Bundy calmed down, and he sat down, and they showed him some restraining equipment that they could use on him legally if he didn't cooperate, and to get him in that chair and keep him there. And he apparently looked at the sheriff and said, "Oh, now, Ken, I'm not a violent guy." And he sat there and he leaned back, and they took his teeth impressions. Now, this would come into play for the trial. The venue of the trial was moved because of the publicity out of Tallahassee down to Miami, Florida. There was, again, Ted Bundy insisted on being chief counsel. He had 4 different public defenders. So he had a lot of people working with him. But the thing was, almost instantly, the public defenders said that when you're in a room with Ted Bundy, you don't work with him, you work for him. And the judge allowed him to be chief counsel in his own trial. So he got to boss around his own public defenders, and he did that almost immediately. The defense, or rather the prosecution, offered him a plea deal. He said, listen, and this is, now keep in mind, this trial is for the Chi Omega slangs, the girls in the dorm room, or the sorority house. And so what happens is they offer him a plea deal. They said, no parole, 75 years, but you will not be executed. And at first, Bundy thought, if I take that plea deal, I can, go to prison, start this 75-year sentence, and then file a motion to have the plea thrown out. And after a few years, when the evidence and the memories deteriorate, maybe I can get acquitted. So that was the original plan. Well, they show up to court, and Bundy stands up and says, I'm not taking this plea deal. In fact, my counsel over here, he is completely incompetent to serve me, and I'm going to fire him right here on the spot. So the guy basically says, well, fine, you want to fire me? I'm out of here. Look, dude, I'm not getting paid for it. I'm the fucking public defender. If you want to do this by yourself, have at it. And Bundy's like, great. This trial becomes the first nationally televised trial in America's history. You could sit down and you could watch this live on television.
I want to now.
You can. There are many, many clips from it, man. The trial started on July 1st, 1979. There was an attorney, a public defender who worked with Bundy named Margaret Good. She said that what they tried to do was they tried to get Bundy declared incompetent so that he could not defend himself. Because almost instantly what they realized was that Bundy's arrogance was to such a degree, and he had to be the boss all the time. And so they figured he is self-destructive as hell. Like everything he's doing in this courtroom, he's grandstanding, he's making speeches, he's doing these big declarations like you would see an attorney do on television, but it's all working against him. It doesn't make him look good to the jurors or to the people watching at home. But I tell you, some people that did make him look good too, and that was all the little groupies that had come to the trial to sit in the gallery, because they were just eating up everything Ted Bundy said. He would turn around and smile at him and wink at him and smirk at him. He had all these weird distractions planned for his trial. He wanted to get off the subject of the murders as much as possible. Like one of them was, he said that the lighting in his cell was too dark. And then another time he had put in a motion for a change of menu because he said he'd been eating the same grilled cheese sandwich over and over again. And
he's lucky to get a grilled cheese sandwich.
I tell you, man, they should have grilled something else about his ass. One of the first things that happened on this prosecution is they brought in a cop who was at the Chi Omega dorm house, who walked into one of the first responding officers, and they wanted him to set the scene for the jury of what it looked like in that house. Well, Bundy jumps up once they're done talking to this officer, and he says, "I'd like to cross-examine this witness." So he walks over to the cop on the stand, and he says, "I want you to describe to me in as much detail as you can exactly what you saw when you walked into that sorority house." And so the cop is like, okay. And so he starts to describe everything. And it gets to a point where Bundy's like, okay, could you say that again? And he's doing this a lot. And he wants this cop to go into graphic detail. And it gets to the point where everybody in the courtroom is weirded out, including the jury. And you can actually see footage of this. And you can see the looks on these jurors' faces as Bundy keeps pushing home these graphic details that he wants the cop to tell. And they're looking at him like, what's going on? Like, where are we? It's very strange. And so Bundy is kind of reliving the crime, it seems, in the courtroom while talking to the police officer who discovered it. Again, arrogant, self-destructive. Everything he's doing is working against him. The bite mark evidence, hugely damning. This was the first time a major criminal case used bite mark evidence, and the jury was blown away by it. It would be basically like the equivalent of when DNA first started to come into courtrooms. Bite mark evidence nowadays is not really all that exciting because it's been around for a long time. But the jury, when they saw that Ted Bundy's teeth matched the bite marks on Lisa Levy and where the nipple was bitten off, you know, they were blown away by it. It was very bad for Bundy. So bad that on July 24th, 1979, after 7 hours of deliberation, not very much time at all, the jury comes back and they declare Ted Bundy guilty on all charges. And when the sentence is read by the judge, he's given 2 death sentences to be carried out in the state of Florida via the electric chair. On top of that, this was only the first trial. There was another trial because remember the little girl, Kimberly Leach? Well, they decided, look, Bundy might try something weird and get acquitted on one of these other. We want to make sure he gets executed. So what they do is they try him again for the murder of this little girl. And that trial is even crazier. Again, he acts as his own attorney. At some point, he is so enamored by himself. He gets up at one point to the jury and he holds up his hands and he says, you know, I'm being persecuted, sort of like Jesus was persecuted. And the jury is just like, oh man. And his public defenders are like, Jesus, Ted, Christ. Nothing here is working, for him. Now there was a woman named Carol Ann Boone. She stood by Bundy this entire time, thought he was innocent. She was like his mouthpiece on the outside to the press. They had dated briefly back when he was in Washington State. And when he went on the murder trial, she came to Florida to support him. And she was there. And when she was being cross-examined by Bundy on the witness stand during the Kimberly Leach trial, Bundy said, Carol, I just want to say in front of God and everybody that I would like you to be my wife. And Carol goes, really? It's like, would you be my wife? And Carol's like, yes. And so in the state of Florida, if you say that to someone in a court of law, apparently you're instantly married. So he instantly married Carol Boone while she was testifying on his behalf. The jury was not impressed. In fact,
he's a clever little bastard.
he was clever. His defense, his public defender said he thought that Bundy was like, they're not gonna sentence a recently married man to death. Well, Bundy once again underestimated the competence of the Florida jury system, and they sentenced him to a third death sentence to be carried out by electrocution in the Florida electric chair. And that's how Ted Bundy ended up on death row.
What city was the trial?
It was in Miami. The first trial was in Miami. The Kimberly Leach trial was in Orlando.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's something in Orlando because I had friends get married in Orlando. Like it was probably like 2000, like 6, 8-ish, somewhere in there. But I remember when I went to their wedding, they still had the desk that Ted Bundy carved his name into, and it was still there. Like now that I think about it, I should probably try to go buy it.
Yeah, that would probably be a good investment with some of the memorabilia.
Maybe I shouldn't have just included that detail if I was trying to buy. Yeah, well, 8 years ago that was a thing that existed. Like it was just, yeah.
Well, Ted Bundy, he's all over Florida. So Zach, what do you want to say about the death row time spent by Ted Bundy?
Well, there's so much to say about that. As everyone knows, he wouldn't confess to anything. As far as everyone's concerned, he's an innocent man. Well, we all know that's bullshit. And so finally, help me out, Elsie. The woman with the child.
The girlfriend that he had in Seattle that, before he got married to Carol Ann Boone was Elizabeth Kepfler.
Yes, Elizabeth. Well, him and her, right when he was on death row, they were talking, and they had an argument, through the glass, and she's yelling at him, did you do it, Ted? Did you do it? You need to tell me if you did it. And he kept, denying it. No, I'm an innocent man. No. And she had an envelope with her the whole time. And she, at one point, pulls a photograph out of the envelope and slams it against the glass. And that on that photograph was one of Ted Bundy's victims. That woman was found in the woods with her head missing. She was yelling at Ted where the head was and why he would take the head. And he wasn't saying anything. For a few moments went by. He stared at her and he breathed on the bottom of the glass. And he wrote one word: hacksaw. She was horrified. That was Ted Bundy's first confession to what he did, admitting that he actually did something. She was horrified, went back, told the police what he did. When the first officer walked in, saw Bundy wiping it off, but he saw the word saw on there before Ted Bundy wiped it off.
Now, we should say that is what Elizabeth wrote in her book. So yeah. that would be something that is her story, and as far as we know, that actually happened.
Yes, I read on a few different accounts from other officers that witnessed it and everything that allegedly that happened, and that was the first confession, going towards what he did, and then he admitted. Then he started admitting to a lot. They at one point said that he killed. How can someone kill 37 girls? And Bundy just looked at him with anger and said, "Add a digit." And they were like, "Wait, what?" So then they didn't know if it was 37. So a lot of people count that as 37. Some people count it as, over the hundreds.
You could add a
Um,
0, make it 370.
I mean, really, yeah. I mean, who really knows? He left it open for anything by saying that. Um, and then he confessed to something. I mean, he confessed to a lot of stuff. I mean, he confessed to being a thief when he was, growing. I mean, obviously we talked about he would steal the most random shit. That's like, why? Why would you steal that? And he later on admitted that he looked at. I mean, he was a very possessive guy. He wanted the finer things in life. He wanted to possess everything. Well, people began, he started to feel that way about people. Like he had to put his victims, they were his possession. He could do what he wanted when he wanted with them. And he admitted that, that played into a huge part of it. He admitted that when he first started attacking girls, it was just about the sexual assault. But then he killed them because he was afraid of getting caught. And then later on, that really turned into the killing was almost more important to him than anything else. Like he enjoyed the killing. So he confessed to a lot of stuff. And one of the most horrifying. Oh,
Now
LC.
we should say that he was in death row. He was on death row for just about 10 years. And the reason he was giving a lot of these confessions is because he knew that if he had more information to give, which he seemed to have a lot of information he was holding back, that he could use that to manipulate the system and push back and stay the execution because he did not want to die.
No.
So a lot of these confessions were to the cops and the detectives in different states, and he would give them information, and it would lead them off to find somebody else. So they knew it wasn't bullshit. So he kept stringing them along to try and avoid his own execution.
Did they
Yeah.
ever say who the credit cards were? Like you said, he was caught with like 24 credit cards, right?
He was caught with 21 credit cards, and a lot of them he had taken from. One thing he would do is he would go outside grocery stores, and when ladies were putting their groceries away and they had their purses, he would come by and slip. And he was such a good pickpocket, he'd just take the credit card right out and keep walking.
Okay, so they weren't nothing connected to people he killed or anything like that.
No. None of the credit cards were his victims. He was at least smart enough to do that.
So as we're getting closer to time running out for Ted Bundy, Zach, you want to talk about some of his later activities on death row in terms of who he told what?
Well, he later, one of the most horrifying things that he admitted to on death row was, well, it was a lot of stuff going back and forth about they asked him about a little girl that was, they used to follow him around as a kid, and, she went missing when he was like 14. So they suspect that was his first victim, but he wouldn't admit to it. But he admitted to his crimes later on, and then blamed it on his last few days on, before he was executed. He had an interview with a pastor. What was his name, LC?
I want to say his name was Dobson. He was a very well-known TV preacher.
Yeah.
Now I want to also say that throughout this entire time he's on death row, he keeps insisting to Carol Ann Boone and to his mother, Louise, remember her, that he's innocent and that he's giving these people information, but that it's all bullshit. He just wants to not be executed. So these two are his biggest supporters: his wife, Carol Ann Boone, and his mother. I should say, conjugal visits are not allowed in prisons in Florida. But if you slip the guards some money, you might be able to get a little something, because somehow Carol Ann Boone got pregnant with a daughter named Rose Bundy. And she insisted that was Ted's daughter. She already had a son, a teenage son from a previous marriage. And you have to keep in mind, Ted and her are married, and they stayed married throughout the entire time of death row. So Bundy actually had apparently a daughter with Carol Ann Boone, but he definitely had a stepson, a teenage stepson, who would visit him in prison.
Yes. And
was that ever denied? So she's around now?
Yeah, the daughter, Rose, is still around. I assume she's still named Rose Bundy unless she decided to change her name, which I wouldn't blame her.
Huh.
Yeah, and towards the end, he with this preacher, he blamed a lot of his crimes on pornography. And he said that it started with a lot of horror fans are familiar with the Tales from the Crypt comic books and stuff. Well, they had a lot of out branch comic books that they used to do, and it was a lot of them was like shock suspension. A lot of them were like detective novels. Well, a lot of them were depicting women in very graphic, horrible ways, being strangled and tortured, and that really excited him. And then he admitted that, which I really get mad at because I read those, so that kind of pisses me off that he blamed it on that. And then he started saying that porn played a big part in what he wanted to do, what he was doing. He got into more graphic stuff, and the preacher was trying to ban porn and everything.
Yeah, I mean, it was such a bullshit. It was a load of bullshit.
Everyone can tell that Bundy was feeding him what he wanted to hear.
Yeah, and the guy is like anti-porn. This preacher is like, porn turns people into murderers. We should ban porn. And Bundy's just happens the day before he gets executed to have a TV interview with this guy, where he says, "Yeah, porn turned me into a." I mean, such bullshit. I mean, I'm sorry.
What really makes me mad, and because and LC and I, you and I can relate to this. He was blaming at one point in the interview horror movies for making people into psychopaths and stuff, and that really he's lucky he didn't get the skin bumping for that.
Bundy is a master manipulator and liar, and he's thinking, hey, I can get on this guy's show a day before I get executed, and I'll be on television again. And he would say anything he could to get on that fucking TV show with that fucking TV preacher. But fact is, doesn't really matter because the very next day, his ass fried.
And that was in '89. And what really bothered a lot of people because of the horrific things that he did, he died with a smile on his face. And there's a photograph that you can find on the internet of it. And he died with a graphic smile on his face. And the fact that he,
well, I like that part of the story is true. He has his dead body does have a smile on his face and a big fucking burn on the top that he earned. But what I love about the story is that when they led him into the execution chamber, the witnesses say that he saw that electric chair and his legs went to jello, and he nearly fell over when he walked in and saw that chair for the first time. And then he kind of stood up straight and he collected himself. And they said, when he sat down in the chair and they started strapping him in, that he'd regained his composure and was calm, and everything. But I just like the idea of Bundy having brutally murdered all these women and bitten them and cut their heads off and had sex with their heads and fucking children and murdering kids and throwing them in pig pens. I love the image of him walking into that electric chamber or that, the room with the electric chair and just seeing that fucking thing and nearly falling on his face.
Yeah, it's kind of.
He earned that electric, chair too, and he did some of the most, little facts for people that don't know this, and maybe this for you, Ryan, that may not know this.
Yeah, I didn't know most any of this. I the only thing I knew when we first started talking about this show was that he killed some women, and that was like the extent of it.
Well, the term serial killer did not exist before Ted Bundy.
Oh.
Yeah, I like that reaction.
There's not much to say. That's like you're a sociopath when you establish stuff like that. Gotta make your own category. But they still were, though. I mean, it's not like all these people were just Ted Bundy copycats that came in later years. It's been happening for God knows how long. But we don't have the same things back then that we do now. You can only imagine what happened in the 40s and the 30s and the 20s. Stories we'll never hear.
Well, see, and this is one thing that's very fascinating. Is while he was on death row, he helped police catch another serial killer. Another serial killer by the name of, do you know Elsie?
Yes, I know. He gave clue. They came to him about another series of murder going on in Washington State, the Green River killings. Thomas Harris actually used part of this as his inspiration for Hannibal Lecter, because the cops came to Ted Bundy while he was on death row, and they did ask him his opinion about people like himself, and they particularly wanted to know about this string of prostitutes who were being murdered in the Green River area. And that eventually turned out to be Gary Ridgway. Many years after the fact, he was caught after Bundy's execution. But Bundy was consulted.
Yeah, and Ted Bundy helped because he knew a lot about, because a lot of the killings were very similar to Bundy's. So Bundy helped with that. And as everyone knows, that there's a new movie starring Zac Efron about Mr. Bundy.
Yes, it's called Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile. Now, that title is very weird, but where it comes from is when he was first sentenced to death in the Chi Omega sorority killings, that's something the judge told him. He said that his actions were extremely wicked, shockingly evil, and vile. And so that's where the film title comes from. It's still a mouthful, though, and I watched it yesterday, and Zach, you watched it too.
Yes, and it's very, it's very accurate. They've made not a lot of movies about Ted Bundy, but I'm all about accuracy. Like, why make a movie if you're not going to make it really accurate? And I'm sorry, if I offend anybody out there, but I'm not the biggest Zac Efron fan, and but he is one hell of a Ted Bundy. You really like, oh, he pulls out that evil, cocky asshole very well.
Yes,
I highly suggest anyone watching it.
His performance is actually very, very good in the movie. But and I don't want to spoil the movie for folks because it just came out on Friday on Netflix. And this might sound like a promotion, but I have no affiliation with this movie. I'm not getting paid to mention it. But I do think it's worth mentioning since we're talking about Ted Bundy and the movie just came out on Friday. Now, that said, for those of you who want to watch the movie and think you're going to get some sort of violence or murder scenes or stuff, you're probably going to be disappointed, because to be about such a violent guy, the movie has almost no violence in it. In fact, I think there's a punch thrown, and I think that, well, there's one thing that I won't tell you because it has to do with the movie. It would be like a spoiler thing. Not a violent movie at all. This Extremely Wicked.
But see, and for those, that may be disappointed with that because, some horror fans like, violent movies, they've made other movies about Ted Bundy, one in particular with Fangoria, produced it and stuff. And that one's just called Bundy. That one's a pretty violent movie about Ted Bundy. And then another one is The Stranger Beside Me.
The Deliberate Stranger.
Thank you. I got tongue tied because that's another movie about him. The Deliberate Stranger is a great movie about Bundy.
Yes, that one that's a good one. The Deliberate
Mark
Stranger.
Harmon is amazing in it.
And I'll be honest with you, I kind of think I prefer movies like Extremely Wicked because I know I'm in horror movies and everybody knows me from that, really, but I have a problem with horror movies that depict the murder of real people as if they were horror movie set pieces.
Yeah.
It's something I don't like. I think about the families of the victims. I think if my mother, my sister, my daughter was killed, I don't want to watch a movie where it's portrayed as if, wow, isn't that a cool murder scene?
Yeah.
So I kind of liked the approach that they took in Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile.
Well, and Zac Efron, he's a hell of an actor. I think he did, he played Bundy very well. I don't think that's a very hard role to play, because Bundy's a very fucked up guy. So kudos to him.
Well, Ryan, what do you think as we're wrapping up our second part of the Ted Bundy story? What are your overall thoughts of this guy?
Stop fucking killing females, dickhead. Like, goddamn. Like, I don't know, man. Like, it seems like it's not that we, glorified him in any way, but it seems like, all these years later, like, it's fucked up how we are as a people. Like, just like I mentioned the deaths, because it'd be worth more money because this guy who was a piece of shit, carved his name into it. It's just fucked up, like the psychology of Earth, and like, what attracts people. Like we could be doing a movie about, a female who got a Nobel Peace Prize, or something, but or it doesn't have to be a female, anybody, but that's not what attracts us, and that wouldn't sell at all. I wouldn't produce the fucking movie. I'm sitting here talking about it. You know what I mean? Like, I'd be like, no, because it's not where the money comes in, and that's kind of how we're trained to be as a people. But like, I don't know. We should. I think we should just forget the guy, to be honest.
Yeah, you bring up a good point.
Maybe not forget it. You don't want to forget, his victims who didn't get to live out their life. But as far as he goes, like, who gives a shit? I would care more about. I would care more about a story. But if you killed some people because someone did something to you, or you had a personal vendetta, or like, that like someone wronged you, like I'm more down for that. Like the random like killing of females for no apparent reason, or maybe because 20 years ago you're mad about some the whole thing just is stupid. The whole thing.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I mean, women, children. I mean, it's just horrible. Anybody, really, anybody. But I don't know. There's something about children, and I mean, geez, come on, man.
I don't. Yeah, we could go into that one. Fuck's sake, what's wrong with people?
But you bring up a good point, Ryan, because there's a huge market for this murder memorabilia, and it's shit that's just.
Allegedly.
Well, on that note, I think we're going to wrap up for today because we've kind of gone over our time a little bit. But I hope you guys enjoyed it. There's a lot to talk about, and we squeezed a lot into 2 episodes about Ted Bundy. There's a big story there, as you can probably tell. I want to thank my buddies here for being on the show and joining me in this discussion. Ryan, thanks, bud.
No problem.
And Zach, thank you, man.
Always a pleasure.
And until next time, I want to tell all you guys watching to take care of yourselves. See you next week.